Greetings from Southern California.
Yes.
Let's welcome everyone. Let's welcome Phil Thibodeau from Brooklyn College here to talk to us about, well, it seems one of the themes is generosity.
Generosity. Generosity, so much. Um, Generosity. In fact, before we even talk about generosity, I just want to say something that, I was in preparation for this, I was looking at your video channel and I have all these videos and I watched about a half dozen of them. And
Wow, thank you.
first of all, First of all, they're like really good, and you just put them out there. And I know you have the Patreon, but you're just like doing this really for your soul and for people, and that is an illustration of generosity right there. So, it's just something. And I really liked all of them. That I just like watched them straight through in little bits. But I think the last one I watched was with Joel Christensen, and I thought that was just like one of the best discussions of Homer on like YouTube or the internet that I've seen. I was just like that was a really good one. Or I think it was the first. I guess you have two maybe, but that was the first one, and it was really good.
Thanks so
So
much. I mean, really, it's the generosity of wonderful humans like you know, giving their time to interview with me that makes it happen. And of course, we all know Joel is just amazing as an individual.
yeah, yeah,
My
totally, totally,
really
yeah.
as a human being is a shining example. So, yeah, he makes the show sparkle. And I mean, I think one of the best things about meeting people, you know, I meet one person and then I ask if I can interview this fascinating person and they talk to me, and then it generates interest in other people and people that I would never have met otherwise. And I mean, I met you through connections through that, and
Right,
I'm just so
right.
grateful. I'm just so grateful. I'm learning all the time because, you know,
Hmm.
I mean, I have a certain specialization, and that's it. And I see Homer a certain way, and I would like to know Homer.
But that's not a specialization. That's like human nature. Your specialization, you have music, but you have this very humanist vision, I think, of Homer, or what we can learn from Homer, and that's very broad. That's as big as all of human experience, and so it's a big topic.
Well, let's
Um,
get into what you know.
let's get into it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What do you want to
So,
talk about?
well, I just wanted to say, there's so many different aspects of generosity that, like, I made a little list, and I was just trying to put them all together, and um, because we practice it and we can think about it. Now, I guess some things that I wanted to talk with you today in our conversation about, are, the kind of get at the essence of generosity, but also look at the failures of generosity, and some of its, if some things have a silver lining, I don't know what the opposite of that would be, an iron lining, or whatever. But to kind of look at generosity when it falls apart, or when it's twisted in the wrong direction. Because I think that generosity is a virtue, right? I mean, I think we think of that as a positive thing. If you're a generous person, that's a piece of praise. And we just intuitively kind of know that, generosity is giving abundantly and freely, to other people. And it's especially relevant for people involved in the arts or teaching or any sort of creative work. There's a great book that, I don't know if you know this. It's by Lewis Hyde. It's called The Gift. And if you haven't read this is the recommendation for everybody. He's not paying me to plug this or anything. This is a great book. It's called Creativity and the Artist in the Modern World, and it's called The Gift, but it's about generosity in practice, and how it has this sort of model of, I think of it as the hot potato model of generosity, which is you as a person are given a gift by whatever, the muse or nature or what culture, whatever it is, you have this gift, and then you have to make use of it by producing something and giving it away, sort of, and then whoever receives it then sort of passes it along, and you get this sort of circulation. And if you hold on to it, it kind of dies. You have to, it has to come out of you. And so this book is about that process, the psychology of it. But it's about a lot of other things too, including the way in which the sort of gift economy of creativity is a sort of anti-economy or counter-economy, different from the monetary one in which we live, because it's just in a whole different spiritual realm, and it exists prior to it historically. So it talks about the conflict between making a living and making one's art, and how you deal with patronage and actually like getting food in your mouth while you're making art, all these issues. So it's a wonderful book, and it really stresses most of the positive aspects of generosity, right? But at the same time, generosity in English is a positive term, but if you look at the etymology of it in Latin, it goes back to French and then to Latin, but the root of it is gener, which means, or that root in a lot of the Indo-European languages means like birth or family. And so it originally means of good birth. It's a quality of coming from a sort of aristocratic background. And what's the connection? Well, because if you're from an old family of good birth, then you have enough wealth and material and surplus that you can be generous and give things away, because that's the defining character of being an aristocrat. So that's good. Like that, if you have a lot of stuff, you should try to give it away. But it does sort of suggest that generosity is a kind of a privilege, and it's also a sign of inequality, social inequality, right? That somebody has more. So there's something about the origins of the word that take us back to a more aristocratic culture, which does not always set well with our democratic norms and our democratic culture today. And then there's also been, you can make a critique of certain kinds of generosity. And my favorite example of this is there's a book by the writer, an essayist, Anand Giridharadas, called A Winner Takes All. And I don't have my copy here because I gave it away. But what it is it's a wonderful book in which he talks about how the super wealthy use generosity to exert power in society and create an appearance of doing great things. And let's drop $100 million on Yale or on Stanford or wherever to create a new institute that will benefit health all over the world. And you think, that's a wonderful thing. But of course, they've chosen that as the use that the money will go to. And a lot of that money in the first place came to them because they evaded taxation, or they found loopholes in our system. And so there's it's escaped. It's an act of generosity, but it's individual generosity rather than the collective, people make a decision about how the wealth of the society should be deployed. And so it's problematic in that sense, right? It's there's undoubtedly good that's being done, but it's just cementing a kind of inequality in society. So that's another critique of it that is always sitting in the back of my mind when I'm, we're thinking about generosity and trying to make the decisions about where and when and how to be generous. We want to avoid creating a situation of dependence or inequality or making things sort of worse in the world.
What do you think?
And
I'm sorry. So
yeah,
in terms of like, let's say scholarships, grants, and fellowships, where do you think that place in with an institution in a university setting, as you said, because we, donations are really play a lot into the not only the founding of certain institutions, but in their how certain people view them, right? Like the more
mm-hmm,
money there, the more endowments there are to certain
mm-hmm,
universities, then they can make the university look better. They can and of course, we get the problem of nepotism that occurs because
Hmm.
people who give endowments, they would then expect their family
Hmm.
members to be able to step in there if there's a hall named after their family and so on. Um,
Right.
all that given. So there is that exchange. It's an
Hmm.
exchange, right? It really of like here's a gift, but then we are getting something back, are we not? In
Hmm.
return. So it's not really one side. It's not a true gift, as I think that's what you were saying. That's why it's more of a power play because yes, I'm giving money, but what are you giving back in return
Right. Right.
for that?
Right. And
So
the size of the gift is often so large that we don't ask those questions, because now, so you're from a lower income family, and suddenly you've got this $60,000 a year stipend or whatever. You don't have to pay tuition to go to this school, and that's wonderful, right? That's wonderful. You couldn't have gone to this school otherwise, but you have to look at the whole system and look at who's controlling the admission, and what were their motives for doing it? I mean, sometimes, the Sackler family is a good example. You can look all over the world. There are Sackler museums and Sackler institutes, and they're doing all sorts of wonderful things. And the money came from the sale of basically narcotics. You know, I mean, no, I mean that's basically a large part of the Sackler funding was from not illegal drugs, but the opioids and stuff, like getting people addicted to their drugs, and that's where it came from. And they've settled this case out of court, and a lot of places have taken the Sackler name off of their museums and institutes and endowed chairs because of that. So so this I'm not it's not a critique of every act of generosity or endowment, but it is, you have to look at when we have hundreds and hundreds of instances of this. We have to, with a considerable fraction of the wealth of the United States held by a very small amount of people, when they give 1/10 of 1% of their wealth to create this institute, well, okay, that's great, but what about the rest? Where did that money come from? um, you know who controls it? What does it do? What is the power relationship? So that's a big topic. That's a really big topic. And it colors the lenses through which I look at something like let's just say Virgil. Look at Homer's Iliad and the Odyssey.
the Xenia
So
there, right?
then, yeah.
Yeah,
Right.
and I'm thinking of that wonderful scene where now I'm thinking in terms of uh, Janaeus, the family and those of high birth. So that scene where one uh, says, "Here's my bloodline," and then the other one says, "Oh, wait a moment, your
Mhm.
grandfather hosted my grandfather, and so let's exchange presents." But it is between two people whose families were good and wealthy, and they could exchange these wealthy presents. And I remember
Mhm.
something along the lines of, was it in the narrative itself? I feel like it was. Like it's an interjection from Homer saying, and it's interesting because this one side got the better deal really than the other. I don't
Mhm.
think I'm imagining that. So that
That's
was
right. That's Glaucon and Diomedes. I think that's in book 6 of the Iliad, maybe. Right, where you get these two aristocrats exchanging arms on the battlefield. And there's a lot going on in that scene because they both tell stories about their family, which are interesting, and get some myths in there. And Diomedes is a major hero in the Iliad, and Glaucon is just this minor figure who only makes an appearance in this scene. And he's the one who gets the worst out of the deal because he has I think, the better armor. He gives it to Diomedes, and Diomedes walks away with it. And I always thought that in that scene, what's really going on is that they're talking this talk and then they make this exchange. And then Homer said, why did he do that? And I think the answer is obvious, which is that we behind this pretense of equality between one aristocrat and the other aristocrat with these ties is the fact that Diomedes could easily take his life, that he's a much better warrior, right? He's like one of the best on the side of the Achaeans. And so I don't think it's an accident that at the end he walks away with this gold armor and he's got the better of the deal, because that was basically Glaucus, paying for his life, right? I think it's not stated in the text, but I think that's what's going on there. Is he's saying, right, let's have an exchange, but it's going to be very unequal, and this is how he's sort of buying his own life with that armor trade, so that it's not really. It looks like a free gift exchange, and I think it's under compulsion of threat of death, and I think that colors it. So that's just like one example of where you got to look behind the surface of generosity and gift giving and what's going on. And what's the biggest gift giving or biggest gift offer in the Iliad?
Like physically?
The what's the largest?
Big, huge horse? What are we talking about?
Oh, that's
Sorry,
true. Yeah.
that's not really, the horse thing is really like mostly in Virgil, isn't it? Rather than
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
never, of course. It's only after, horse taming Hector dies that the horse comes in the Iliad.
Right.
So we never
Yeah.
see the Iliad have it, and yeah, no, actually, who is
Dona Ferentes, right? The Greeks bearing gifts, and so that's another loaded gift giving, an apparent act of generosity, right?
that's not the generous present you're talking about, though.
No, I was thinking of Agamemnon, right? So Achilles is on strike. We got to get him back. And so he rattles off all these things. I don't want to rattle all of them
It's
off, but
amazing when you think about what he was giving him. I mean, it's staggering. I'm like, he gave what? That's like $1 trillion worth. I mean, like I
right.
was really sitting there going, what? I mean, it's billions dollars of worth, billions. So I was like, that's crazy. Is
Mhm.
I mean, just the fact that he had that to give away,
Right, right, right,
right?
right. Hmm.
Sitting
Right.
there.
Villages. Because I'm going to give you 5 villages and you'll get all the tax revenue from them and they'll worship you as a god. And that's just like one part of it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's absolutely stunning offer. And it fails. It fails, right? Like, any, because Homer's he always is always surprising us, right? That's what's great about the narrative. You're always being surprised, and it fails. And so he's always making us, through these surprises, he's making us ask questions. And why does it fail? Why does Achilles say, no, I'd rather anything else, and I'm going to go home. In fact, I'm not going to take you out. I'm not even going to stay. I'm going to go home now. All right. He not just rejects the offer, but he makes his disagreement with Agamemnon even more intense. And what's going on? And if you look at the text, it's just something that we can do is we can go back and look. And this is always a fun exercise to compare. At the end of Agamemnon's offer, he says, I'm going to give him all these things, but he must acknowledge that I am his superior. All right. He says that expressly. And then when Odysseus passes along, almost word for word, the offer to Achilles, he leaves that out. He says, he's done, right? And then Achilles goes off and he says, I hate more than death somebody who doesn't tell the truth and doesn't say everything, because he can see right through Odysseus, and he knows that Agamemnon wanted Achilles to bend the knee and say, I'm taking these gifts, I'm coming back, but I'm going to acknowledge you as the superior, right? And he knows Odysseus was doctoring the message by leaving that part out, and he knows what's going on because Achilles is a very keen student of human nature. Despite all his other failings, he sees that, he knows it, and so Agamemnon fails. And so why does it fail? Because Agamemnon is, using the gift, using an apparent act of generosity to get Achilles back, but also to keep his position in the hierarchy. And Achilles cannot abide by that. That was the thing that he cannot abide. And I always think of the story of the Iliad as really the story of how Achilles ascends as the authority, the person sort of in charge of the Achaean army, and Agamemnon's authority just slumps off to nothing. And he really vanishes very steadily over the course of the book until by the end, he's just like doing things that Achilles tells him to do. And it's the story of sort of two men, one who knows how to deal with this world and one who doesn't, one who fails at it. So Agamemnon doesn't know how to do it, but Achilles is a genius at sort of gift giving. And I wanted to talk with you a little bit about book 23 of the Iliad, the games for Patroclus or Patroclus. Are you a Patroclus or a Patroclus person? How do you pronounce it?
It's both ways. I having scanned it, I'm like, oh, definitely in these books it's Patroclus, but then sometimes it's Patroclus. Like,
Okay.
I'm like, oh wow, I need to actually go through TLG and count the number of times when one is and one is the other. And then, for instance, it's funny what scanning can do, right? So I thought that, for instance, it's always going to be Thetis. And I was like, wow. But then I think I counted one or two instances where it's Thetis. So I'm like,
Oh,
well, there you go. Even just one instance of it wrecks the whole thing. Like that's a given thing, right? So
yeah,
it
yeah.
can still play with names. It's not
Hmm.
set completely. So it doesn't have
Yeah,
to be Patroclus, please.
yeah, yeah. So funeral games for Achilles' friend there. And so the book begins with the funeral, and then we have these games, and they're kind of an Olympics. There's a lot of the Olympic type events, and so usually in the Olympics you think, all right, you got first, second, and third, and that you get that when there's multiple contestants in the games, like the chariot race. There's like multiple prizes and stuff. But what's so interesting and surprising about that book is how virtually in every event, there's some dispute about the winner at the end of each game or contest, or it doesn't come to the end. Like it's not a proper set of sports events, because sometimes it's contested. I think like the chariot race, there's like this dispute with Menelaus and I forget his name, but there's a dispute over who exactly really deserves first and second and third. And so this happens multiple times. And what does Achilles do when there's a dispute? He brings out more prizes and says, here, right? And everybody's like happy and they take it home, and he solves it. And this happens again and again. Or there's I guess it's a wrestling match between Odysseus and Ajax. And they go at it for a while, and like finally Achilles just says, stop wrestling, and you both get it's like everybody wins and everybody must get prizes, right? And so they both go off happy. And this happens repeatedly, and you can see how this hyper competitive environment between the Achaeans, and they're so proud and they're so competitive, creates all this potential for strife and tension and bad feeling. And every single time Achilles diffuses it, and he shows his talent for reducing social tensions by giving out gifts and making people feel valued. And I think that's a sign that Achilles is the superior insight into sort of human nature. He's much better than Agamemnon. And then the funny thing is that the end of book 23, they're going to have this last event. I think it's for throwing javelins or something, and Agamemnon says, I'm going to participate in this one. And Achilles says, let's not even hold the event. Everybody just take the prizes and go home. So what does he do? That he doesn't allow Agamemnon to show off his arete, his prowess, right? He just says, take the prize, go home. And that's the end of the book. Oh. And Agamemnon doesn't say anything about it, but he is so down at the bottom of the totem pole at the end of the poem. And Priam just negotiates with Achilles about the truce and everything. It's just an amazing. If you pay attention to what happens to Agamemnon, it's just one humiliation after the other. It's very aesthetically and satisfying, I think, to see that.
Thanks for
Happen.
bringing up Achilles's really just analytical skill. I mean, whenever people say, "Why do you like Achilles?" I go, "Lots more than what's obvious." I mean, people are always like, "You really like Brad Pitt and Troy?" Yes, I really did, but that's not why I like Achilles. There's so many things. I said he's just really intelligent, and he does unexpected things for reasons that if you read the book carefully, you get it. And he's a flawed character, sure, but there's a lot. His flaws are not the obvious ones. I think. I mean,
Mhm.
people say he's they get mad. I know people have called him immature. I'm like, in what way? I mean, in the beginning, he's the one that said, let's have this assembly. I would like to talk about stuff in this assembly, like what's going on with the people, why are they dying, like he actually like wanted to help. He wanted to know. He wasn't out there to just say, who do we have to kill to what. So he
Yeah,
wasn't like that,
right.
that way.
In book one, he's a champion of he's a tribune of the plebs, as it were. He's sort of standing up for the mass, the laos of the Greeks to find out why are people dying. Let's get to the truth of the matter.
Yeah,
And,
and
and
most people
Agamemnon
tend
doesn't
to.
want that truth to come out.
Right, and then of course the usual obvious thing that people say is, well, he's killed many people, but yeah, many people in the Iliad kill many people. They are soldiers, so that's his job. Uh,
Yeah.
and very unfortunately, people forget that Patroclus is there as a soldier as well and kills people as well. Like
Mhm.
you can name how many
Yeah.
he's killed, and Patroclus has women slaves,
Hmm.
there with him. With one, he sleeps with one.
Hmm.
We can assume that she's an enslaved person. That she's not
Hmm.
free. She's not doing this of her own free will. And even the nice old gentleman, the Nestor, his wife was initially somebody who was an enslaved person and then became his
Hmm.
wife. And so people have done terrible things in the Iliad. So out of all these terrible things, I'm thinking, yes, Achilles did all that. Now, besides all that, what is it that makes him stand out from the rest? Besides the fact that for whatever reason he's the first person we're talking about, and
Hmm.
why is the son of Thetis the hero of the Iliad, right?
Hmm.
What's so strange and unique about him that has come up? And so I'm glad you brought up his ability to perceive that in order to appease men of war, you give them presents, but not the way Agamemnon did it. Not in exchange for saying that this lord is the best. That's not,
Hmm.
no. So
Hmm.
yeah, just
Yeah.
good effort. Here we go. Presents
Yeah.
and great. You showed your strength, manhood, and all that with these games. Let's give you a prize, and um, completely avoiding that problem with the armor later
Hmm.
that Ajax and Odysseus have, right? Which
Right. Right.
a contest
Yeah.
of the armor.
Hmm.
Sort of, there's an irony in there.
Yeah, that's looking ahead to that contest, which Odysseus will win that one, and then that's a tragic ending because Achilles is not around to diffuse it. Um, and you brought up some things that made me think of generosity again. One is that um, one of the multiple tragedies of the existence of being an enslaved person or under violent compulsion or being many of the women in the Iliad is that you're not able, it's very difficult for you to be generous, right? When you're poor, when you don't have control over property, when you don't have these you don't have material resources, you can't be generous with material resources, right? Except I mean, you're making food for people, but that's like sort of their food already. So I think that you know, that's one of the tragedies of not having your own possessions, is that you can't give things away. And when, you know, where do we find deviations from this? I mean, the women can give their tears, they can give their emotions, they you know, it comes through in places, right? um you know, they maybe bring garments, and what they do is they bring it as a service. And I see in that a kind of trying to work within the extremely limited agency that they have to express a very human and deep-seated desire to be generous in some way, even to people who did not deserve it, in a sense, who were there at one time. They're either ignored them or were their owners or masters or whatnot. That they're freely giving of something, and that's their exercise. That generosity is their last effort to be human. And then to take things from another point of view, from Achilles, right? He's this character that we find very fascinating because of his intelligence, as you said, and because he shows knowledge of human nature, and he's capable of nobility. And yet he's also he's a murderer in the service of a war, and he's effectively a kind of a mercenary soldier. And this is one of the, you know, another sort of paradox of generosity, is that when this is not just the Iliad, but when we read any kind of literature, we get into the characters and we sort of become them, in a sense. And we suddenly, if they're done right, this doesn't automatically happen, and it's not something that necessarily should happen, but when they're done in a certain way, we can identify with them, even though probably if they existed in real life, we might hate them or be terrified of them or just think they're the worst people on the earth. I mean, if Achilles was walking around today, I don't know that we would be friends, right? So we come to identify with them, and that's another kind of generosity, because you're sort of like giving away your own identity while you're engaged with these poems, to identify with characters who you might ordinarily not identify with, because there's nothing at stake in just sort of identifying with it. Whereas in real life, if you identify with a figure, that might entangle you in various personal or political commitments. But in literature, we lend our imagination to identify with various characters all the time, both Achilles or minor figures, or like Odysseus's dog. I mean, all sorts of figures that we will, you know, we put ourselves in the shoes of those figures and think, what would it be like? What were they thinking? And, you know, this is so fascinating to us today, because we want to pay attention to the minor characters. We want to pay attention to the suitors, like Joel was saying in the other video. You know, like what was it like to be the suitor? What was it like to be the maids in Odysseus's household? What would it be like to be Polyphemus, right, in the Odyssey? So that's an act of a kind of a generosity, to shed your identity and to take on another person's identity, I think.
I like Menelaus.
You do?
I do.
Why?
Because he actually had a great cause to go. I mean, he sincerely seemed to want his wife back. Never does
Mhm.
it seem like he wants his wife and her property back. You know,
Yeah.
Helen and her treasures. When it was finally offered, like, you know, can we just have Helen? Is basically what he said. Helen and her
Hmm.
treasures. No, not necessary. Just Helen. Uh,
Yeah.
and when you know, the offer of like just one-on-one fight, just one-on-one, he was like, yeah, fine, okay,
Hmm.
yes, me and Parrot, let's go, Alexandra's face,
Right.
let's fight. You know, I mean, he wasn't, it doesn't seem like he was trying to fight for glory or
Hmm.
honor or
Hmm.
prizes. It seemed like he just genuinely wanted his wife back. That's why he's like the one person that I'm like, yeah. And I didn't hear any, I'm now, I to honestly, I've only scanned up to book through book 12. Um,
Hmm.
so when I say scanned, that's the very super careful reading and everything. So I know those books well, but I so out of those books, I don't remember Menelaus having like an actual mention of there are enslaved people with Menelaus. So it's not a thing that he's associated with, is what I'm
Hmm.
saying. It doesn't show him
Yeah.
being like mean
Yeah.
to certain people or whatever, or conquering a bunch of villages and taking a lot. So that doesn't seem to be the kind of characteristics associated with Menelaus. Um,
He's kind of like Paris in that regard. I mean, he just really likes Helen, and now Paris is like kind of a coward, and Menelaus is a better fighter, but they're not. But Paris doesn't really care too much about honor either, right? He just wants to be with Helen, I guess.
but Paris did
Um,
sack a few cities, like that was mentioned, like on the
mm,
way.
mhm.
I can't remember if Menelaus had sacked a few cities on the way, but that's I guess
He
that's what.
visited in the Odyssey. He says he visited various places in the Eastern Mediterranean, but he seems
Not
to have
sacked.
had
Yeah,
Xenia relationships with his hosts in those various cities rather than having plundered them. I think that's the story there.
yeah,
Although it gets complicated in Euripides' Helen, which is a different story.
sure,
But
sure, yeah. But
yeah, but yeah, in the Iliad and the Odyssey, Menelaus is a very interesting um, and like sympathetic character in a way that Agamemnon, his brother, does not have at all.
right, Agamemnon, as you said, is the one that offered the presents to Achilles, and
Mhm.
Menelaus doesn't seem to have this wealth that his brother has to be offering it to people as prizes. Never once do we get a little side story of all the side stories in Iliad. Never do we
Mhm.
get a Menelaus side story going, I will bribe whoever to go and try to rescue you. It's just
Mhm.
it's just kind of interesting. Like there's not that as far as the privilege of monetary power, of some sort of wealth that he can that he has influence, with which he has influence. Um, he doesn't have that either.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
what? Yeah, it's just kind of interesting. Anyway, I guess I was just trying to think in terms of who was giving stuff, and I thought Menelaus does not have stuff to give.
Mhm.
He doesn't seem to have stuff to give. Uh,
Yeah. I know.
when Achilles was having that conversation with Priam, which is like the only conversation that was in the Troy movie that was actually there. Well, I
Hmm.
think there was another one too. Um, anyway, but that one stood out in my mind because there were three very good um, rhetorical speeches, or just actually dialogues that were in Troy. One was between uh, Odysseus and Achilles, when Odysseus was trying to convince Achilles to go,
Mhm.
and Patroclus in the Troy movie was the cousin, and Odysseus ends up, really his audience was Patroclus, and he knew it, because if he
Mm.
could convince Patroclus, then Achilles would come. And
Yeah.
Achilles, the one time Achilles draws his sword to Odysseus is when he realized, oh wait a moment, he's talking to Patroclus. This is what he just
Mhm.
did. And then there's that conversation between Hector and Paris, where Hector was telling Paris, "There's nothing glorious about war, little brother." And I was
Right.
thinking, gosh, I wish that were in the Iliad. It
Now we're
seems
in the Iliad. Yeah.
it seems like it should be, but it never was. However, the conversation between Priam and Achilles was in the Iliad and was in Troy movie. But of
Mhm.
course, in the Troy movie, they didn't say this one last thing, which is Hector was given in exchange for Hector's weight in gold.
Mhm.
And Achilles says something kind of nasty, where he says, "Oh well, gosh, he would have weighed more if only I hadn't dragged him around," or something like that. And I thought, oh, that's horrible. But that's a discrepancy in the Iliad too, because supposedly I think Athena kept Hector's figure unmarked or something.
Mhm.
But then on the other
Right.
hand, Achilles says that, so as if Hector was actually dragged around and such. So Achilles wasn't actually being generous and giving Hector back. He did feel bad, but it's not
Mhm.
you could argue it wasn't generosity. I mean, maybe you could, and he could kind of save face by saying, "Oh, but I got his weight in gold." I don't know. What do you think of that?
I don't know. I mean, I'm sorry, I was just thinking about the movie itself, how it's changed. You're just talking about all these changes that
There
that
are
the
changes. Yeah.
movie makes in the plot of the Iliad, and how that too is a kind of a, I just think about how that too is kind, I mean, it's reception, we call it reception, which is a simple name for a really amazingly complex phenomena. And what are the, when you adapt something like that, you make cuts and you take certain things and then you fill it out and you contribute your own vision to Homer's vision, and you make something new. And there's a certain, I mean, obviously they're working for money, but there's a certain generosity involved in any kind of reception, because you're taking something, right, and you're trying to give it new life and keep it alive in the, which is doing a nice thing, doing a nice thing for Homer. Do you show the Troy movie to your students or
I
your
do.
family? Or
When I
yeah.
show the Troy movie, I show the speeches because I try to do it in terms of persuasion. Like I go pathos, logos, ethos. Let's go take a look at what actually persuaded someone.
Mm.
So
Okay.
I look at those speeches and then I show them the Brad Pitt's "Let's go get him" speech. Glory, it's yours with a
Right.
sword, versus Hector's good guy approach, which is Troy is our mother. Let's protect her. So he's
Mhm.
in the protection side. So that's always the good side in many ways, right? Because you're
Yeah,
protecting
yeah, yeah, yeah.
territory, your family, and they're attacking. So they're already they're the bad guys in that way. So I always try to frame the narrative, and the other thing is I feel like I really have to talk about the Patroclus Achilles thing, where Song of Achilles is important to many teens.
Yeah.
Madeline Miller's The Song of Achilles is very important. Um,
Hmm.
in fact, it was introduced to me by a teen who, he said, and I think it's because he had, he definitely felt that this was important to him. And so he said, I think you should read this book. And I had just read Kirke Circe by Madeline Miller, and that's how Madeline Miller and I pretty much connected, is through Circe. So I
Hmm.
had not read The Song of Achilles. I didn't really know what it was about, and so when I read it, I thought, okay, I have to address this in case it means anything to my students. If it
Right.
helps them.
Got to be where they are.
That's
Hmm.
right. That's right. Discuss the book in any way that if that's their entry into it. Talk about friends, lovers, and the meaning of war with people in it. So yeah, I try to kind of see in what ways my students can connect with it through. Is it useful to them when discussing literature, and is it useful to them personally, to go into this literature? Is it useful to discuss the the wonderful ships, coming in, because it's the various nations, and let's look at their attire, and let's look at how they're coming in and their behavior, and just from a sort of cultural perspective, so, or even food, and like how often do we see food laid out, and who lays it out?
And who does it? Yeah.
Yeah,
Hmm.
who are the ones? It seems to always be the women or the loved ones, right? So Patroclus,
Practical does it.
Briseis is right there, but does she?
Hmm.
She doesn't. So it's
Hmm.
it's the one that's somehow the beloved one, right? Is the
Hmm.
one that's laying out food. So
Yeah.
somehow that's the action of generosity
Hmm.
from the lord of the place. So Achilles says, "Okay, guests, honored guests, please sit, and beloved one, come and let's serve our guests." So it's like
And that's an act of generosity too, right? You're laying out the spread, and right, that's part of Xenia, but it's also I think food is so important at the end of the Iliad, because Achilles goes on a hunger strike, as it where he says, I'm not gonna eat I'm not going to eat. And then, he gets the nectar, he gets the ambrosia or whatever that allows him to survive without eating for a few more days, and finally to kill Hector. And when does he finally eat? He breaks bread with Priam, right? And that's the humanizing moment. And one of the other tensions in Achilles' character, of course, is between the human and the divine side of him. And the word for human in Homer, in Greek hexameter poetry is brotos, right? An eater. The etymology is brotos in Greek comes from brosko, which means to eat. And so that's what distinguishes us from the gods, us humans from the gods, is that we eat food and they eat ambrosia, which means not eating, right? So immortality is the same thing as not having to eat food. So what the gods eat ambrosia, it's not really food. So as soon as Achilles eats food, it's kind of a final, a sort of descent of his character from this sort of divine, doesn't need food, superhuman condition to a human condition. And that's what allows him to kind of look eye to eye with Priam, and for them to, in this supremely moving moment, to look each other in the eye and see, there's so much going on in that scene, but they're both breaking bread. And that's a good life lesson too. And this as a mother, but when somebody comes to you, they're like in real distress, and the first thing you do is you give them some comfort. Give them some juice, some milk, give them some food, because you take care of that first, and then you can talk about it. And so the generosity of food is the first thing, always, in all cases. And
that moment with Priam is such a defining moment, and I'm so glad you're bringing up the breaking bread thing, because it is also the moment that Achilles knows that after Hector dies, that not soon after he will die.
Mm-hmm.
He doesn't know how, but he will.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe it's an unspoken thing, and it didn't say. Would have been nice if it said that, something like he realizes that these are the last moments, something. But
Mm-hmm.
we can read into it and realize we're getting towards the end here
Mm-hmm.
for him.
Yeah.
Right.
Right. And he can see that. He knows that, right? Because he's so canny. He's so insightful. He knows that. And of course, the prophecy, is there too. So the poem ends. It has a weird ending because it's not the end of the Trojan War, obviously, and yet it feels like the end of a war. And I know that we can, maybe some other time we can talk about whether it's an anti-war poem, but if you just look at
I would love to talk. Please come back another time.
Yeah, well, we'll talk about it, because that needs its own, I think, proper time slot. But the end of the poem ends with the burial of the dead, and as a truce, and then the poem kind of ends. And so the poem ends, we're sort of out of war. There's a sense in which you could imagine a variant on the whole Trojan cycle where, I don't know, everybody just goes home. It's like done. There's a sense of completeness to it that makes it feel like the war is over. And it's only our knowledge of the rest of the cycle, and of course various clues in the poem, but that tells us that that's totally an illusion. But I think aesthetically and emotionally, when we get to the end of book 24, it really feels like there's such a sense of completion that it's hard to go forward. And so look at this. We've marched through the, like little soldiers. We've marched all the way through the Iliad. I wanted to tell you a story to tie in a couple things, because you are a teacher. I am a teacher, and a lot of people watching are probably teachers, and if they're not, maybe they will someday. But when I was in graduate school, maybe fourth or fifth year in, I got a course. There was a tutorial reading Greek with a second year Greek student who had done all first year Greek and was going to read Homer for the first time. And so we would meet twice a week in the cafeteria. And, speaking of food, we'd have some food and we'd sit down and we'd get out our copies of the Iliad and work our way through book one. And I don't know how much we got through in the course of the semester, but I had a very, very bright student. And she was always, she was quiet, but was extremely diligent and extremely good at the Greek and really, obviously really into it. So it was great. It was great tutorial. And then, I graduated, I got my degree, and then she went on and graduated. And I really didn't hear her name again until I saw Madeline Miller, Song of Achilles, come out, and realized that, that was her introduction to Homer. And that student, I had no idea that she would go on to become the big novelist. And that student at Brown was, as I knew her then, was Emmy Miller. And so that was, she wasn't saying then that she was planning to write these novels. And so you never know which of your students, what they're going to do with what they're learning and where they're going to take it. And we kind of scatter our bread on the water and see where it goes. And sometimes things are unpredictable, but that's one of the final beauties of generosity, is when you can just sort of put your effort out there, and then it does things that you never foresaw. So
My students, some of them give me the most wonderful presents, which are artwork. They will
mhm,
give me artwork of things that we've talked about in class. And
mhm,
I teach actually Latin. I had
mhm,
one class in ancient Greek a few years ago, but it just wasn't popular enough to repeat. We have a
mhm.
very competitive school. We have, like, including Latin, 6 different languages. It's not
Wow.
wild. That's a lot.
Yeah.
So there's so many competing for each other. So
Yeah.
fitting Greek in there is very difficult. Um, it would end up competing against Latin in many ways, right? I try to teach them ancient Greek and Greek when I can, just teaching them the Greek alphabet and so on. But
Mhm.
these kids, they give me artwork of passages, that they like, and sometimes it would have the words along with the, yeah, like some sort of graphic, something there. And it's just so beautiful. Sometimes they would simply draw me, like they would draw me with a lyre, and they're like, yeah, that meant a lot, when you were singing or whatever. And that's, it's great, because
Mhm.
I will keep that forever. Like, no matter how famous they get to be, like, wow, I got this thing. And just, of course, words, right? That the generosity of students, this is what they can give. This is what they can give
Right.
us.
Right. Right.
That this is our immortality in many ways. Like the fact that they're telling us that they will carry us in their memories. You know,
Mhm.
maybe not
Right.
forever, but for a long
Right.
time.
Right.
And
Right.
that's a lot. That's a lot already. That many years in their memory banks for a bit of time is
Mhm.
a lot.
Yeah.
Some students um, have been in touch, kept in touch with me for like 20 plus years. Yeah.
Wow.
So, it's usually the students and the parents, and then when
Mhm.
both. It ends up being 2 generations that are keeping in touch with me, and it's a wonderful feeling.
Mhm.
I didn't I didn't wake up one day thinking I was going to be a classicist. I thought actually that I was going to be a poet and a writer, and
Mhm.
uh, and being a quadruple major, in music, psychology, English, and classics. I could have gone any which way. I taught music for many years. Um, I still tutor psychology to college kids.
Right. I
They need
heard that.
help in
Yeah.
any of their psych courses and papers and English. You know, I do that only to. I have to say, when I say college kids, it's usually the kids of my friends because I don't
Mhm.
have very limited time. But I know, talking to you, that you didn't wake up one day and decide that you wanted to be a classicist when you were in
Yeah.
high school. And I find this to be an interesting story. So if you don't mind, can you let us know how you ended up teaching
Yeah.
the Iliad?
I mean, how did I end up teaching the Iliad? I mean, this is such a long story, but it's not really that long. It's just things in life are so unpredictable, and you can never foresee how you're going to get from point A to point B. Um, so as you know, like I started when I was at Brown as a graduate student, I was studying Vergil and focusing on the Eclogues and the Georgics, and I was trained as a Latinist. But before, a long time before that, when I was a teenager, I worked in a planetarium, or as a volunteer in a planetarium, and my partner and I met there actually a long time ago, and we gave planetarium shows, and I have a very deep-seated love of astronomy. And but when I went to college, I saw that astronomy was basically computer programming, and like a lot of math, and it kind of lost the romance, and classics had the romance in spades. And so I went in that direction and enjoyed it immensely. But when I got tenure, and I done a book on Vergil, I said to myself one day, what do I want to do? And that old passion for astronomy came back, and I said I wanted to write a history of Greek astronomy, incorporating a lot of the new developments which we have, which we have in terms of our knowledge of how Greek astronomy relates to astronomy in the Near East and in Egypt and in other places, and how it all fit together. So I started to work on that, and to do it right, I realized I needed to have a better sense of the chronology of developments in Greece during the 5th century and in the Archaic period. And then I got just like sidetracked again from looking at astronomy to end up looking at, you know, the timing of all the different Greek poets, and where's Sappho and where's Alcaeus and where's Archilochus and where's Homer and where's Hesiod. And it's when I got to Homer, it was a big mess. And if you look at when people think Homer, assuming like Homer is like this poet who created the two epics, that what people have dated him to this really wide range of different times. So now I'm not even looking at astronomy anymore. I'm not looking at Vergil anymore. I'm just trying to figure out where Homer is. And I just started looking at all the scholarship on it, and I taught it in gen ed courses, taught the Iliad and the Odyssey for many years. But I started doing a deep dive into it a couple years ago to just try to put everything together in context. And originally this was just as background for a study on Greek astronomy, but now I've gone back even further. So I've wandered so far astray. I don't even know whether I'm a Latinist or a Hellenist, or whether I do literature or whether I do science. I'm just hopelessly lost in classics, but that's fine because I enjoy it so much. So
Interdisciplinarians unite.
yes, exactly.
Wonderful. Well, I'm excited to, finally, I mean, at some point when you start feeling like you can share your upcoming book or articles
Absolutely.
on this, I mean, I I find that whole thing interesting. I loved, for instance, Eric Klein's Trojan War.
Yeah,
Very short,
yeah,
very short
yeah.
book, packed with so
Great
much.
book. Great
Yeah,
book.
because
Hmm.
it really starts making, or at least me, started making me really look at, just the chronology of when certain things happen and how. And I don't know much about archaeology. Like, how do they know? How do archaeologists know that there was a war, there was not a war, when there's different types of fire? Which kinds
Hmm.
of fire means war, and which kinds are just like, yeah, no, it was like, yeah, there was fire, but it was like probably not that kind of war fire. It's it's more like a local one or something. I'm like, wow, that's fascinating, and
Yeah.
that's how they decide. this is probably the time of what people consider the Trojan Wars, right? Wars or
Mm-hmm.
not. And but then how many times does Homer how many times do Homeric bards change the story? You could kind of tell in terms of here bronze is being used and here iron is being used. And
Mm-hmm.
I started like circling when I'm like, oh, this is says bronze, this is iron, and oh, definitely. Um, I wish I could talk to someone who specializes in chariots, for instance, because when there are these passages that start talking about chariots and really describes them in such loving detail, I'm like, wow, that's okay. This particular bard really loved chariots. Cool, love it.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, you know what I mean? Like you can tell
Yeah.
like that it can't
There's
all
a
be
ton
pretty,
of
right?
craft now. There's a
Yeah.
ton of craft knowledge in Homer, and you're like, wow, yeah.
And it's not just bards, right? Like when it's written, you have to think, okay, there's the bard singing it, then there's like when it was written, they
Mm-hmm.
wrote it down this way. So at what
Mm-hmm.
point was this a thing that they could write about? Were they fascinated by? So it's really something trying to find out, you know, who wrote who wrote the Iliad, like as
Mm-hmm.
in not just West the making of the Iliad, which
Right. Yeah, yeah.
beyond
Beyond
that,
that. Yeah.
so much beyond that, right? Since I mean, we
I just got a book in the mail the other day. Actually, it's gonna be looking at over the next few weeks. This is not relevant to generosity, but it's called Orality, Textuality, and the Homeric Epics, an interdisciplinary study of oral texts, dictated texts, and wild texts by Jonathan Reddy. And
wow,
it's
that
talking
sounds
about,
really cool.
yeah, it came out in 2019, and I haven't seen it. It didn't get a Bryn Mawr Classical review yet, so I don't think looks like a really fascinating book, and but it hasn't been reviewed in any classics journals that I could find. So, but it looks awesome. It's like about what you were just talking about, and and it's very relevant to the chronology of the formation of the texts. So, I'll be looking at that for the next week or two.
We definitely have to, or you definitely have to, if you find something exciting, please,
Yep,
tweet about it and, or, yeah,
will do.
because I'm excited to know what's going on there. And of
Yeah.
course, going back a little bit, as soon as you're ready to share anything about your upcoming exploits into the chronology uh, uh, of Homeric, anything that would be really fun. Um,
I would love that. I would love to find a good way of making that accessible. Maybe bring some pictures,
yes,
and because it's a little technical, but if I can make it accessible, that would be great. I would love to present it to people on your channel. It would be fabulous because you attract a lot of really cool people. So I like that.
thank you. Thank you so much. I just finally hit 1,000 followers on YouTube, and I'm just like, oh, that's so cool because it's like 1,000 actual true followers,
Uh-huh.
is better than like 6,600 followers on Twitter. And I'm like, I'm sitting there going, I don't actually know 6,600
No.
people. I'm not even sure I personally know more than 200 people, so I don't really know these 6,000 people, but I can kind of believe and imagine 1,000 follower. You know what I mean? Like I'm like I can kind of see that maybe
Mhm.
friends of friends that someday I can talk to. I'm actually excited about those people on YouTube, like the people watching me and watching you know wonderful people that I connected with and who are just absolutely brilliant like you. So yeah, I'm so looking forward to the next time we have a chat. And you already had a theme in mind, right? Was is it an anti-war? Um,
Yeah.
oh my gosh! Wow, that's
Yeah.
gonna be so cool. And wouldn't it be
Yeah.
great, like to have a couple other people jump in as well? You know,
Yeah.
yeah, like an actual thing where we can all get together and say our thing. That'd be fun. That's what I'm building towards, like at some point, like, hey, let's talk about a topic and let's all jump in there. So,
Hmm.
yeah, thank you so much, Phil, for a fabulous afternoon
Thank
here. I
you.
know you're 3 hours later, so it's approaching your early evening there. So,
Hmm.
on a Saturday, thanks for sharing your time. Thanks for that. I really
Thank
appreciate
you. And anybody who made it this far, I've just, you know, It's great. Thank you for your time out there watching, out there in TV world or whatever you used to call it. Now, I don't know, YouTube world, right?
YouTube world. Online video world. Yeah.
Yes.
Thanks, everybody.
All
And
right.
we'll see you later.
Okay. Bye bye, guys.
And see you soon, Phil.
See you too.